Okay, so we're going to do part two of reviewing for the abnormal psychology test. I've got three more categories of disorders to go over with you. We've got dissociative disorders, schizophrenia, and personality disorders. So, dissociative disorders are when somebody separates themselves from their consciousness. And so, we're going to start with dissociative amnesia. This is where a person has had incredible trauma, and which is the case in most dissociative disorders. They've had incredible trauma, and so they will experience some kind of loss of autobiographical memories of themselves or things that have happened to them. And so they have lost that memory not because of head trauma, like physical trauma, but because of an incredible emotional stress that they went through in some whatever sort of trauma that occurred. A fugue state can happen with a dissociative amnesia, and it's called dissociative fugue. Fugue means to flee or to leave. And so what might happen when someone has this trauma is they might forget who they are or where they are, and the fugue is the part where they might leave and just go somewhere else, whether that's across the street or whether that is to another state or city, and they leave where they're at and they show up somewhere else, and oftentimes they don't know where they are or where they've been or what they've done, and they have said that they have fugued. Next, we have dissociative identity disorder. This was once called multiple personality disorder. This is what someone thinks of when they hear split personalities. But really what's happening is the person has multiple alters. They need to have two or more alters, meaning their personality is fragmented. And typically what is thought to have happened is they've experienced some kind of incredible trauma, and it's the way of the mind's way of coping with that trauma. And so the personalities fragment to whether it is to protect or to shield or to take care of, or just whatever it is, the personalities have a role in that person's coping of that stress or trauma. The alters can be different genders or ages. They have different voices. Oftentimes they'll have different handwritings. The person might even have a different heart rate when the alter switches in. And they will experience unawareness. When an alter switches in, they have this amnesia or this lack of understanding of what's occurring when their alter has switched in. Okay, next we have schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is when someone has lost touch with reality, and there are several characteristics of schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is when someone experiences any number of these characteristics, and some can be more prominent than others. They'll typically have hallucinations, and the hallucinations are anything in which they're getting a sensory experience that is not really there. So they are either seeing something that is not really there or hearing something that's not really there, and it's typically going to be an auditory hallucination. They're hearing voices, and oftentimes it is negative. It's something that is causing them paranoia. The voices are persecuting them. They're telling them to do bad things. Delusions are thoughts. This is a thought that is not real, and I shouldn't say that because they are having the thought, but the thought is not, it's not founded in reality. So typically their delusions are going to be either grandiose, meaning they have a thought that they are something they aren't, like they are a superhero or they are a celebrity. So it could be grandiose. It could be some kind of delusion of persecution that someone is out to get them and they're really not. So maybe that is that the FBI is wiretapping their phones, people are following them at night, aliens are watching them through their TV, but a delusion is something that is not real, but it's this thought that's very intrusive, and it's usually either persecuting them in some way or it's this elevated sense of self. They're also going to have thinking that is really bizarre thinking or disorganized thinking, and it might even convey itself in their speech. They might just be speaking and stop mid-sentence, or they might have word salad or echolalia where they're repeating words. They might have make up new words, but their speech is going to be strange, and that might be one of their more prominent characteristics. They could have strange behavior patterns or disorganized behavior patterns. One aspect of that is catatonic behavior. That is where the muscle movements are unusual. It could be really rigid muscle movements. It could be frozen muscle movements. It could be waxy flexibility. And catatonic behavior can look very different, but that is where the motor movements are unusual. Negative symptoms are when typically we think of symptoms as when you have something. In schizophrenia, they could lack something. And so we call those negative symptoms. Many negative symptoms would be things that you should have, but they don't possess. So maybe they lack hygiene. They lack emotional display. It's lacking in behaviors that they should possess. Then we have personality disorders, and there are 10, and so I'm going to try to go through these really quickly. I'll just give a brief explanation of each one, like a definition, and then we'll be done with our disorder segment. Okay, so personality disorders are separated into clusters, and they're into clusters of disorders that are similar or somewhat similar. First, paranoid personality disorder is when someone's just incredibly paranoid or suspicious, and they are always feeling like people are out to get them. Schizoid personality disorder is easy for me to remember because I think schizoid avoids. This is someone who's going to avoid social situations, not because they're fearful of rejection, but they avoid social situations because they are indifferent. They don't have any preference towards praise or criticism. Schizotypal personality disorder is someone who experiences life in a peculiar way, and they often might feel like their life is a fantasy, or they live in a magical world. And they might talk about those things that they feel the way the world is, and it's just peculiar. Cluster B is a category of disorders that's also going to go on to the other side. There's 4 personality disorders. The first one is antisocial. This doesn't mean that the person is an introvert. That's not antisocial personality disorder. This is someone who has lack of remorse and empathy for others. When they do wrong, they're not going to feel bad for it, and they just cannot feel for someone else. Borderline personality disorder is characterized by an instability in relationships. Oftentimes they have a person that they value, and then they devalue them, and then they value them and they devalue them, kind of like a love and a hate, and it's just this inability to hold on to a relationship. They might fear abandonment, and so that causes the push and the pull. They're going to have other characteristics where they might be impulsive and have mood instability and self-harm or suicidal thoughts. But really the baseline is the push and the pull in relationships. Next, we have histrionic personality disorder, and this person has an extreme desire for attention, and they are going to exhibit attention-seeking behaviors, whether it's being overly excitable or flamboyant or just anything to draw in the attention of others. Narcissistic personality disorder is an extreme self-focus, so much so that it's hurting others, and it's the lack of seeing others and seeing themselves elevated and higher than others. Cluster C, we've got avoidant personality disorder, which often can be confused with schizoid. Avoidant personality disorder is also going to be someone who is going to show signs of social isolation, but it is because they fear rejection and they fear the criticism they could have, and so they're very socially aloof. Dependent personality disorder is when a person needs someone else for decisions. They're going to be dependent on others for the affirmation to make decisions. They aren't going to take initiative on things because they just need that support from someone else. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder can be confused with OCD. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder is lacking the intrusive, persistent, unwanted thoughts that drive the compulsive behavior of OCD. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder is someone who has a really rigid personality type. They might be what you might call type A. They have a set way of doing things, and they really prefer that set way of doing things. Very organized and stubborn in those ways, but they're not going to be driven by the thought of disease and death and dying and germs and those sorts of things. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Those were all the disorders.